So let's start from the Gemara on Daf Sadik Vav on the base. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, "Eloi shanu elosh b'mishpashal." That we say the Gid Hanashim who will contaminate the rest of the basar that it's in the whole year if we don't have Isha Mulatloi is only if you cooked it, because that spreads it evenly around the entire year. But if you make sleep, then the Isser does not penetrate the entire yerach, just kedekli. You could eat the meat away and peel it off from around the gid until you reach the gid, and you have to refrain from eating the gid. Now, of course, we looked yesterday that it doesn't literally mean right up to the gid. Moshe says you have to leave either a kedei kalipa or a kedei netila, because there is a little area that does become usher. Now, we learned that something called chaticha nasis nevela. So the part that becomes usher, the little piece around it, is like a nevela. So then the question is, once that little piece of kedei kalipa becomes usher, why doesn't it now usher the part near it? And then that becomes nevela, and that should usher the part near it. So why does chatichas nasis nevela stop at the first kedei klipa? Why doesn't it spread from one kedei klipa to the next and then permeate the whole area? That's a shaila that we want to keep at the back of our minds to get answered. So Gemara, Break the Gemara, is that so? It doesn't spread. The Amar Afuna, Gedisha Tzoloi Bechelboi, also Lachel, Afilu Meiresh Ozna. You're not allowed to eat the entire gedi if you roasted it with this chaylev. Why? Because even though it's sleep, the chaylev will spread throughout the entire animal. So how could you tell me that by the gedi it only goes kedei klipa? We see that by the chaylev hagedi it will spread throughout the entire animal. So we already know what the Gemara answered because we looked at yesterday that chaylev is mefafeya. Not all types of meats are going to just spread throughout. Chaylev is fatty, it's spread throughout the entire piece of meat. However, gid is not so much, and therefore it won't spread. Now that means every different type of piece of meat has to be assessed. Does it spread? Doesn't it spread? But that's what the Gemara says. I want to look at the very bottom places. I feel a meiresh osnai. There's a places sherachak min chaylev. The chaylev is all at the back of that. Reish osnai is the complete. The furthest away in the guf of the gedi from where the chaylev would be found, but the chaylev is even mefafei over there. The Zaktoises don't think it's because it's running down. Don't say that when you roast an animal, you hang it from its legs, so therefore everything runs down, and that's the reason why the chaylev is mefafei down to the ears. The chein derech, because that's the way they roast things, with the feet up and the nose down. You stick the spit into the mouth of the animal until it comes out from the back hole. The thicker part of the shvud is at the bottom, so it doesn't let the animal slide off the bottom of that spit. And therefore, so now the chaylev that's at the top of the animal, because it's positioned upside down, is going to drip down on the head. That's not why we say that chaylev is mefafeya throughout the entire animal. Even if it was head up, still it would be usher. The mefafeya chaylev l'mayla. The chaylev would bubble its way up to the top against gravity. We know that if you drop tzoynein into cham, it's going to be usher. Lamanda Omar Tata Gov. According to the Badam who holds that if you have a fight between cold and hot, Cold does not belaya. Hot is belaya. If cold falls into hot, according to Manu Tatagavar, you look at it like it was all hot, and it would be as if it was cooked together. And therefore, Veloisagi Beklipa, Klipa wouldn't be enough. Even though the heat is at the bottom, we see it climbs up. Now Tosus makes this practical. Our minig is we pile one meat on top of the other meat when we're salting the meat. So this is what we do. If you're salting many pieces of meat, and you leave this entire pile sitting in a big vat, so the stuff at the bottom will actually be soaking in the water. Some of the pieces of meat, half of them will be in the tzir that drain down to the bottom, and some of it will be above that level. They cut all the meat that was sitting submerged, and they throw it out, the osir, because it's osir, it's cooked or soaked in tzir, which is done. But but the part of the meat, the same piece that was above the tzir, it's mutter. You don't say, like by the chela, that the dam is going to need a feilah then should ask the whole piece. Kida omar gabi chela, like we're saying here. It's because every substance is there. The dam does not bubble up like chela would be. But the nature of dam is amina the dam mishrik shark. It's like it's like a scotch card. It flows over and it doesn't absorb. The dam mishrik shark, when it falls out the meat, it doesn't get absorbed into the meat. Rather, it rolls around. And as it's draining down, it would not be mivla. Even on its way down, it won't get absorbed. It won't climb up. The meat that's sitting in its ear, that doesn't only have dam inside it, it has shuman as well. You don't say that the shuman at the bottom of the piece, which absorbs the dam that's in that piece. You don't say chaticha nasas nevela, and now the shuman, which became nevela machmas the dam, could not climb up. You don't say that. Because the shuman itself is dam mefeya, and the shuman now has become infected with dam. Because of what Rabbeinu Ephraim teaches us. Rabbeinu Ephraim, that I believe Tosis referenced earlier, that the whole chiddush of chaticha nas nevela is not by any other iser; it's only by the iser of basar b'chol. Therefore, it's not a problem. Zok Tosis, even without a Ephraim shita, even if you hold chaticha nas nevela by other isurim, still here it's not a problem. Since the original Isser, the dam itself, cannot climb above the level of the tzir, even through chaticha nasas navela, through the shuman, it won't do that either. And this is the big Yosy that we need to focus on, that Tosis is revealing to us now. Chaticha atzla nasas navela, boy seris has kol chatichais. The iser itself, if it spreads throughout, that's where you would say that it could aser everything. But chaticha nasas navela, you won't say if the original iser cannot possibly spread. If the original iser here is dam, you don't say chaticha nasas navela on the shuman, and the shuman spreads, but it takes the dam with it. It does not. I'm going to bring you a ride, and now we'll turn on to today's daf. Anytime you ask her kedei klipa, you have a problem, like we started with. Amai ein oisei kedei klipa, chayzer v'oiser, masha. If one kedei klipa became aser, now it's nasas nevela, so let it aser the kedei klipa next to it, and so on and so forth, and then it's going to permeate the entire item. So why isn't it chayzer v'oiser masha? Ubinin zeh yeser akon. Ella, obviously, what must be pshat? The time of the original Isser will never penetrate more than Kedei Klipa. We're talking about the sleep. And therefore, Chaticha Nasas Nevela cannot spread that. That's one shot. Rabbi Eliezer Mimitz, who is the Sefer Yereim, this is a very mechudishtik pshat. If you look at the Sefer Yereim inside, Rabbi Raza spoke it out, we see that what Yereim is saying is a very interesting chiddush. You only say Chaticha Nasas Nevela if the Chaticha Nasas Nevela is on the whole piece of meat, not on the Kedei Klipa. And it's not a scientific issue, it's a lumdus issue. Chaticha Nasas Nevela means this gets a din of Isser. It's not Isser, it gets a din of Isser. You only say it gets a din of Isser if the whole thing gets a din of Isser. But part of a piece of meat to give it a din of Isser, Lagab spreading, you wouldn't do. Tosus does not like this. Pshat and Tosus comments the Ein Zetam. The Oid Tosus brings another right that Chatich Menasas Nevela will only spread to one layer. You'll never be able to eat meat because every meat would have a problem. You know that when salted meat sits in the salt, it gets more and more of a salty flavor. You definitely taste the tama melech in the whole meat, and that melech has salt, has dam in it, and you don't say that because of that the whole meat becomes usher because the melech was nasas nevela, and now the taste of the melech has permeated through the basar. You don't say that. Even though the tama melech is nivla babasar, tam adam sheba melech a nivla b'loitva. It won't be impacted by the tam adam, and therefore it's not us. So this is the chiddush. The Chatich Nasas Nevela is only one layer; it doesn't spread further, because Tosfos says that the Isser will never go more than to Kedei Kli. So Zog to Gemara, Shiny Chelev de Mifafeya, and that's why by the Gedi that you roasted, the Chelev will spread throughout the entire Gedi, but the Gid that you roasted with the Yerech, the Tam Gedi, the Tam of the Gid will not spread throughout the entire. Zog to Gemara, Ubechelev, but by Chelev you do say that it permeates the whole animal. Yomer Rabba Bar Barchana, I Rabba Bar Barchana taught us. Uvda Havaka made Rabbi Yochanan. There was a story that happened in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Bechnisht the Mohin, the Besmedrash of Mohin. And the case was exactly this case, where they roasted a Gedi in its Chelev, but also V'shaylu Rabbi Yochanan. They came and they asked Rabbi Yochanan, what's the status with this Gedi? Rabbi Amar Koilei for Oichel Achem Gilachelba. He said, you do klipa. You just said a minute ago, Gdishach Tzali B'chelboi, the Chelev is Mefafeya throughout the entire Gedi, it becomes Asur. Rabbi Yochanan didn't paskin like that. He paskin you should make klipa. Zakti Gemara, Hu Kachu Shava. That was a Shvacha Gedi. What does that mean? Kachu Shava. It was a Shvacha Gedi. So there's a one-line Tosfos that offers two pshatim in what that means. Zak Tosfos, Ahu Kachu Shava. Mefarish Rabbeinu Tam, Kachu Shava, it was weak, Ulakach Shari, the Ched of Kachu Edim. It's the quality and the properties of this chaylev, a shvacha, thin, gedi, its chaylev does not have that property that it's mefafeya. So no matter how much chaylev there is, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be mefafeya. Only kedei klipa will be also. That's what I'm trying to do. The other Pshat says no. No matter what type of chaylev is always mefafeya. So why is this chaylev not going to be mefafeya? Why did Shlomo kachashava? It's content. Avada, its chaylev will be mefafeya. But since there's very little chaylev, it will become bottle b'shisha. Okay. Now there's a very big shaila. The big shaila is where logically there's very little chaylev in an animal compared to its entire mass. So it should always be bottle b'shisha. So there are those who say that chaylev might aser even more than shisha. It's possible that chaylev would aser even more than shisha. Now, clearly, the second teretz of Tosfos says that chaylev is bottle b'shisha, but there are others who are medayik that it must be if the chaylev could aser the whole animal, it must be that chaylev could aser more than shishim. And we're going to see soon that shishim, right now, where shishim comes from for us, is because we learned on Amar Aleph that there's a halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai to weigh your mishayah, whether or not the Giranasha is bottled into the Yerech or not, is if there's shishim in the basar to negate the Yerech, and that's the comparison of lefes b'basar. But we're soon going to see that there's other approaches as well. Zok to Gemara Vayta. Rav Huna bar Yehuda Omar. There's another difference. Kol ya b'chalik b'hav. It wasn't regular chaylev in the gedi that you say is mefafeya. The question was the kidney that was roasted together with its chaylev. And what's unique about that is we know that there's a membrane around the kidney that separates between the chaylev on the kidney and the kidney itself. So normally chaylev is mefafeya. The reason why in this particular case with Rabbi Yochanan the chaylev was not mefafeya is because the kidney was protected from the membrane that would not let the chaylev penetrate. And that's why it was going to be mutter. And Ravin bar Rav Ada Omar, it's kilchis be'ilfasava. We weren't even talking about chaylev. We were talking about sheketz dagim ketanim. We were speaking about shkotzim that were cooked in a pot. And the question is, will everything in the pot become osir because of the tam ke'iker of the shrotzim that was cooked in the pot? And what did they do? They asked Rabbi Yochanan, is this entire pot osir, or can we just get rid of this shkotzim? Amalu, he told them, you know how we will assess the tam, if the tam or iser has penetrated the heter, the tame kfela arma. Let a goy should cook taste it. How does this work? That a goy should cook taste it. So let's look at Rashi. Rashi says, "L'tamei kfela nachtem oivit kachok." Give it to a goy should cook to taste. Can you trust a goy when it comes to iser v'heter? If the goy tells us there's no taste based on his word, we're going to be over a suffix iser daraisa. So Rashi, Vashmi'ina, the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan here is the mutter l'smoy chalav lefitum. If the guy doesn't know that you're asking for halachic purposes, you gave him to taste, and he commented, you don't taste any fish in here. Then you could trust him. You don't tell him what the impact of his comments will be. Rather, you just feed him some food, you offer him some food, and you hear his comments. And from his comments, mention the fitumai, that we could trust. Tosfos is the polar opposite of Rashi. Let's look at Tosfos, what he says. Samchin akfela, as well, it's a one-liner. So Tosfos the same kasha. Aval gav da'ovid kechavemu. Even though he's a guy, you cannot trust a guy for issue matter. Kivan the kvela who since as a professional, loy mishaker, he won't lie. Shlayavshalu nasa. He doesn't want to reduce the reliability that he has as a professional. So it's funny because what would be trusted as asking a kvelar ma, according to Rashi, is only if he didn't know what you were looking for. Is Masech Levitumai. According to us, it's exactly the opposite. Masech Levitumai wouldn't be a raya only if you told him it's relevant and you're asking for his professional opinion. Only there will it work. So there's two polar opposites between Rashi and Tosfos as to how the reliance on the Kfela Arma works. Amara, Mareish have a kakashali. I used to always have this problem. Hadatani, Kedera Shabishal Babas. If you have a pot and you cooked basar in it, lo yavashal bachal. You cannot cook milk in it, of course, because it has the tam of basar in it. That makes sense. But v'im bishel, if you did cook milk illegally in a pot that you cooked meat in, v'noisen tam. If you could taste the meat in the milk, then that milk would be awesome. Next, truma. If you cooked in a pot, truma, and again, v'im bishel v'noisen tam. So frekt the Gemara, this is the problem that I have. So Bishlama Truma, I know how I can taste it. The Kohen will taste it and determine for us if you could taste the Truma in the Chullin that was cooked in this pot. And the Basa B'cholov, if the Isser V'heter that we're talking about is Basa B'cholov, Man Tomle, who's going to taste it? It's like the Gemara. Hashta the Omer of Yochanan, Samchina Nakfela Armo. But now that Rabbi Yochanan taught us that we could even be Samech on the Goy, Akanami Samchina Nakfela Armo, we will be able to be Samech on the Goy that is tasting us. Now this here is also a very big sugya because we have a halacha of not barnat. Here, the tam habasar is in the pot. There's no actual basar there. Tam is keikar, and therefore it'll answer the pot. Now, that works very well. The question is this is clearly speaking about a ben yoima, because if it was any ben yoima, any tam that's in that pot will be nice and tab of gam into what's cooked inside it. So if the belias are more than 24 hours old, even if you cooked cholov in it, it wouldn't be a problem. Now there are those who hold, we baskin, that if it was nice and tam of gam, then you could even chatchila cook cholov in it. But if it was not nice and tam of gam, meaning like an hour, Bryce's case, where the beliefs were 24 hours, lo yivashal b'cholov. You're absolutely not allowed to cook milk in it. But if you did cook milk in it, then you would see if it's bottled barai, if it's bottled b'shishim or not, if the taste is noticeable in the cholov that you put out. Zakt gemar vater. Now, what if you knew with certainty that there will not be any taste of the basar in the challah that you cook in the pot? Are you allowed to cook in that pot l'chatchila? So, pashas you are. So I could have a fleishik pot, and I know that there's so little meat content in it that if I cook challah in it, there will sure be no taste of the meat in that challah. You'd be allowed to cook. But that's only with basar b'challah, because the basar, the beliefs and the basar that are in the pot are heter. The challah is heter. But what if I had beliefs of nevela in the pot? There, I wouldn't be able to cook kosher meat in that pot, even though I know I have more than 60 times the nevela. Why? Because then there's a new problem of ein mevatel iser lechatchila. If the blias in the pot are iser, you're not allowed to be mevatel. However, if the blias are meat, kosher meat, and you want to put milk in it where there's no iser there lechatchila you can cook. Zok to Gemara weiter. The Omar Rava taught us, Omar Rabbana b'taima, sometimes the way you discern if there's iser here is by tasting it. The Omar Rabbanan b'kfela, and sometimes the Rabbanan tell us that you need to get a goyish cook to taste it. Now turning on to Amud Beis. Omar Rabbanan b'shishim. And sometimes the Rabbanan say you're b'shire with 60. Hilchach, when do you use each method? Min b'sheina mina datera. If it's min b'sheina mina of heter, b'taima, you could just have someone taste it. Where would that be? Dr. Rashi, if truma can mix into chulin, for a kind of teter, you could have a kind taste. Now the problem with this is, we know that truma you need 100 times the truma to be mevatlet. So what do you mean you taste it? Tasting it is to see if it's the shishim, but for truma you need way more than shishim. There are those who bring a raya from this Rashi that chulin and truma min b'she'ena mina. You don't need 200. You don't need 100 to be mevatlet. It's enough to have shishim. That we know there's a rule that you need 100 times neged the truma to be mevatlet. That's if it's min b'minoi. Okay, that's a big chiddush as well. Okay, the surah, if it's iser, so you can't taste it. B'kfela, that's when you rely on it. Umin b'minoi, where you can't taste anything because it's the same thing. The lekala mekamatayma inami min b'she'ena mini the surah the lekfela, or if you didn't have a kfela to taste, even the min b'she'ena minoi b'shishim, you use 60. So Rava concludes that by all these surim, not only by Gid Anosha, by all these surim, bittul is b'shishim, which means similar to the lefes in Basar that we have halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai. That lefes in Basar is the shear to use for Gid Anosha, and we know that means echad b'shishim. Dr. Rava, echad b'shishim applies to all these. Let's keep that in mind for a little bit later. Hanu atma also the mlichu Bei Reish Kalusa Begida Dinash. Again, the entire Yerech was salted together with the Giranasha before the Giranasha was carved out of it, and this happened by the Reish Kalusa. Ravina said the whole Yerech is Asar. Ravacha bar Ravashi, sure, he said no, it's a mutter. Asa Shleluya Lamar bar Ravashi. They asked Mar bar Ravashi, the son of Ravashi. Amalu, he said, Abba Shari, my father said it's a mutter. Amalu Rabacha by Rav Ravina, my daite. What's your svara to say that it's awesome? The Amr Shmuel, Meliach Hareu Kareseach, and Kavish Hareu Kamavushim. So your argument is, if the Meliach is Kareseach, it's like it was cooked together. And if it was cooked together, it will answer the whole Yerech, not just Kedei Klipa. But that's not a good reason to answer. Because via Amr Shmuel, Shmuel also said, right at the beginning of our Gemara today, that the only time the Isser gets spread throughout the entire Yerech is if you cooked it together. Aval nitzlaba, if you only roasted it, now, Melech Keresach is only like tzli. It's not like bishul. And if you want to argue, and if you want to say that Melech Keresach means it's like it was cooked together, it can't be. But what did Shmuel say? Melech Keresach kavush k'mavoshel. It should have said Melech v'kavush k'mavoshel. He didn't say that. He separated the categories. Melech is Keresach, and only kavush is k'mavoshel. That would tell us that the Melech is not like the Reseach of Mavoshel. It's just like the Reseach of Tzli. So the Chite b'mai Keresach b'kamer Keresach Mavoshel. When we take Amar kavush harei k'mavoshel, Machlal the Reseach u'Tzli ka'amhar. So Zak to Gemara. So that's a raya that it should only be Osir Kedei Klipa. So how could you say that it's Osir? The Gemara Kasha. We don't have an answer to that. Amar Rab Chanina, Zot Rab Chanina, Kishahen Mishirin, when you're going to be Mishire, if the heter will be mevatel the iser, Mishirin, you can include in your cheshbon the roitiv, the gravy, ubekipa, and Rashi says any little pieces of meat that gather at the bottom of the pot, ubechatichos, and all the pieces. Uvekdero, you could even include the mass of the keli itself as part of that. Ikadari b'kdeir atzma. There are those who learn that it means the mass of the kdeir itself counts towards the 60. Ikadari b'may the bolak there. You only figure out how much the kdeir was by Leah, and that you can use keneged the iser, but not the actual wall of the kdeir itself. I should correct myself. If the kdeir was by Leah heter, then it would count as heter. If it's iser, then it counts as iser. Okay, so let's stop here and let's look at Rashi, because this is very controversial. My debalak there, the Zok Tyson, Zok Rashi, in Ra'idu Kishanov al Shav, when the iser first fell in to this pot, Kodim Shenismayit, before it got diminished in size because of the cooking, Vanon Mishari and Isai, and now we measure it again, La'achar Shenisbashel, after it was cooked, L'chamoy Shenofal Sham, so you compare its volume now after it was cooked to when before, Ve'en Beheter Shishim, and there is no Shishim of Heter, then Oimdim Kama Bolak Dera, you look at how much the pot was by Leah from the heter, and you can use that heter, whatever we assess was nivla in the walls of the keli, you can use that towards being mevatel the iser. Lefi shecheshanoch al sham haya heter harbe, because when it originally came into the pot, there was more heter. The reason why you don't see so much heter here is because some of it got absorbed into the wall of the keli with this night with liasak there. So that's why you could count that little bit extra of heter that has now been absorbed into the kdera towards your heter to be mevatel iser. But the walls, the steel of the keli, that doesn't count. Since there's a machlokes in Lashonis and our Gemara right here, if you can actually count the walls of the keli themselves, or only what's absorbed in them, and the Isur Deraisi, and this is an Isur Deraisa, Rashi, as is custom in Maseches Chulin, is to always paskin. But here he's paskening again, as linan lechumra, v'loy as linan b'kteir, v'loy b'sharin b'kteir. Now, if we just read the Rashi the way it says, he's telling us that you could count what you could assess was nivla in the walls of the pot, but you cannot count the actual pot itself. But if you look at this little base, it tells us to look at the shita. The shita says no. You're not mishar b'kteir atzmai. Zokt the shita of the ikra davar k'maishu bol faneni masharinu. You don't even count what's nivla in the walls either. You only look at the substance that's inside the keli, visible now. So this whole thing, Zok Teshita, we don't rely on. You only look at what's actually now inside the. And the one that as far as is because if you want to look at extra heter that got nivla in the walls of the pot, well, guess what? Some of the Isser also got nivla in the walls of the pot with that same ratio. So therefore, you can't look at that at all. You're only mishar based on the actual food that's in the pot. Another halach. Amar Rabavo Amar Yochid, Kol Yishurin Shevatayra Mishakrinon Ki'ilu Hein Botzel V'Kapur. Not like lefes and basar, which we said applies to Giranasha, but rather botzel and kapur. What does Rashi say? Masharina noisam ki'ilu ha'isr botzel kapur. You look at it as if the isr was either onion or couplet, some other vegetable, The ilu higher nice and tam beheter if Baltal and Kaplet, the same size of the Isser, would make the heter have a taste. The heter zeshin is bashal imay oisra. This is only relevant if you couldn't taste it. If you could taste it, then you could taste the actual food and see if you taste the Isser. But if you couldn't, and you want to know how much you need of heter connected Isser, you make believe that the Isser was Baltal like Kaplet. Or v'inama she'ina mina d'isur, if it's iser, v'leka kvela, v'akati lo iser kilchasa b'shita. At this point, no one said shishim yet. The number shishim didn't come up. So batel v'kaplut, that how much it would infuse its taste into the meat that it was cooked together. Omalei Rab Abba Labai, v'lisharinu b'palpalin v'tavlin. Why don't you look at the iser like it's palpalin v'tavlin? That will aser way more than shishim. They strongly impact the taste of food. Amalei shi'u chachamim the ein nice and tam b'yisur and yosim b'basal. The chachamim were mishayir that it will not put in more iser than the basal kaput. Iser doesn't have such a strong impact like tavlin. It's like basar kaput. Amar Nachman, Zokam Nachman, gid is b'shishim, then gid minamin. So I want to stop a second, because we know that Gemara and Amar Aleph said that the gid, you look at lefes b'basar, which is shishim, right? And over here we're saying batel and kaput is shishim, which means that Rabbi Yochanan over here, who said batel and kaput, must disagree with what Rava said, that it's b'shishim, because we have already determined on Amar Aleph that leves b'basar is shishim. So batel v'kaput might be less than shishim. So it must be that what Rabbi Yochanan said, he must be arguing on Rava. So Zok to Gemara Vayter. Amalei Rab Abba Labai. So we did that already. Zok to Gemara, Omer Nachman, gid b'shishim. When you're looking to see if the gid aser the meat, you need to have 60 times in the meat connected the gid. But the ain't gid b'naminyan. Of course, the gid doesn't count towards the shishim. The gid is the issue. Kechal is the udders of the animal, where it's be'etzem meat, and the iser is not the meat. The iser in it is the boss, is the chalav in it. So chal b'shishim u'chal minaminyan, because it's not the meat that's aser, it's the milk inside the chal that's aser. So therefore, the chal could count as the 60 meat connected the milk that we need to be around. Beitza b'shishim, if you have an egg that's an egg of a oif tameh, again you need 60 other eggs to be mevaklet. Of course, you don't count the egg of Isser. That's the Isser. The Chal itself will be Isser. Rashi says, why? So if you cooked the Chal, and there was, including the Chal, there was 60 times the milk, the meat that you cooked it with will be mutter, but the Chal itself will remain Isser. Because I guess, as Rashi says, why? It did receive tam from the rest of the basar, but the kal itself will not be noitzed tam in the basar. So therefore, and the kal itself is asar, and therefore, if this kal, after it fell into one pot, if it fell into a second pot afterwards, it would be asar. Omar Rabashi, Zok Rabashi. When I was by Rav Kahana, we had the following shayla. Ki misharinan b'didei misharinan, oy b'mai denofak b'dei misharin. When you're assessing 60 to be mevatel the milk inside the kal, do we count the entire mass of the kal as if that's the size of the iser, or do you say no? The mass of the kal is 10 ounces, the milk would only be 10 ounces. You only look at the milk that's in the kal when you're being mavak. Zakti Gemara. Of course, you have to look at the whole kal. Because how in the world are you going to know exactly how much milk would come out of it? So Zakti Gemara, if you're going to say that you look at the whole kal, that's the isser, and you already cooked it in shishim, and it already was bottled, so then it's bottled already. So now if I take that kal and I cook it again in another piece of meat, it shouldn't impact it anymore. Zok to Gemara. It shouldn't answer if it fell into another k'tera, because whatever was in it was already dispersed throughout the first keli that it was cooked in. As Rashi says, once you cooked it in shisha, the whole thing is bottled already. We say that it's totally equalized in the tashel. Why do you need to be a shishim? It must be that the shishim sucked out all of its nourishment, and it's still not going to impact it. Since it's now completely bottled, if you take the same chal and you put it into a different mixture, it shouldn't answer. No, the whole chal becomes a shtik nevela, and therefore it will continue to answer other things. Zok the Gemara weiter. Bein b'shishim ve'in beitzah min haminyan. Omalei Rav Idi bar Abin l'Abaye. Rav Idi bar Abin told Abaye, remember, do you have a time? That means the egg has tam. You tell me the egg of an oiv tameh has tam, that it will impact other eggs in it. I va'amri inchi kimai debei b'alma. The Velt zok that the egg doesn't have any taste. It's like water. Omalei hacha b'may askinon. You know what type of egg we're talking about? Turning on to daf sadik ches amar aleph. The veitas afroyach. We're talking about an egg that already has an afroyach in it, meaning it's already a little birdie. That for sure has tam. Aval tamei aloi. But you're right. The egg of an oiv tamei does not give out any tam, and therefore, if it was cooked with other eggs, it wouldn't answer. And that's going to be discussed tomorrow. But we'll stop here, Be'ez Hashem, and we will be mamshech tomorrow. Everybody should have a gebenchte, wonderful day.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.
Okay.